Welcome back to another episode of Two Marine Dads, where we talk about the journey of life, politics, kids, and family, as seen from the perspective of two United States Marines.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are. Welcome to Two Marine Dads and our next podcast, episode 17. Been at it for a while now. Getting better, hopefully, for you guys.
Iterating every week.
We're going to jump into a incredibly uncomfortable conversation, even for us, even for our standard for comfort.
What are you trying to say?
There's a lot of stuff we plan ahead and we go through, and this has probably been the one where John and I have butted heads the most about how we approach this and the way we portray it to you guys. But I think we came to a good place. I think we're ready for it. So we're excited to present with you guys what we see as the resurgence of systemic racism. Yes. Now you might ask, oh my God, systemic racism. They use that word. They're going to sound just like MSNBC, CNN. And we are not, I promise you.
Yeah, I'm not Rachel Maddow.
Nothing alike. No, you're way prettier than she is.
I look like a boy because I am a boy.
Oh. And we're already in trouble.
We're not going to piss anybody off on the left.
Anyways, and our take on this is to give you kind of a basis of how we look at this. Is we don't see systemic racism in the light that a lot of people in popular reference do today, where the United States has always been racist. No. And that common thread of it's been racist since the beginning to now. That's not where we're talking about the resurgence of systemic racism. We're talking in the context that is a majority, as especially systemically, racism was rooted out during the Civil Rights Movement. The existence of systemic racism was gone shortly after the Civil Rights Movement. There were still bits and pieces of racism here and there, but as a whole, the country had moved past that. Yep. Now we are seeing a resurgence of a different type of systemic racism, one that is pervasive in our educational systems, in our government, and our popular media.
Yeah. We're actively self-imposing those standards.
I wouldn't say we. People are.
Our academics, our colleges are actively allowing this to happen and promoting it and writing it into their curriculum.
And the people that it's being pushed against are opening it with welcome arms.
Correct.
Or actually
encouraging
lobbying for it,
correct,
asking for it,
actively pursuing it.
And
whereas, like you said, 20 years ago, that would have been stamped out and called for what it is, racism. And now we're embracing that same concept, but we're doing it from the other side.
I want you to put yourself back in 2005, before the iPhone existed, when BlackBerries were like the most high-tech gadget on the planet, and the only game you could play on your phone was Snake. Maybe there was more, but I think that was it. 2005. Awesome. Put yourself in 2005.
You got one at Yale, and you got one at Harvard.
Yale creates a graduation ceremonies
plural, based
on race and identity. You have a different ceremony for gay people, or bi, or trans, or whatever that alphabet soup that they go in.
Speaking of that, LGBTIAQ+. Now, I Googled that. I took that straight out of an article that was talking about these, these multiple graduations. And I was like, what is the I, A, and Q plus mean? What does that mean? And I could not find it. Like, I could find LGBTQ all day long, but nothing that included the IA plus, so like that tells me that's unique to this college. And I'm sure maybe
I don't think so.
Found,
I don't know, but 2005, Yale says they're going to have a separate graduation, and we'll exclude everything else, but African Americans, Black people, whatever the most current PC way of explaining, because I got yelled at for saying African American, I've been yelled at for saying Black. I don't even know what to say anymore and not get yelled at, so I just whatever. But imagine Yale creates a graduation ceremony only for Black people in 2005. I can promise you every single administrator at that university would have been run out with torches.
Yep.
And rightfully so.
Yep. Politicians would have came out of the woodworks condemning it, local, federal, state, whatever.
Jesse Jackson and what's his face?
Sharpton.
Al Sharpton would have been front row and center for that.
And rightfully so.
Well, no, those guys are
I'm just saying, like,
hustlers,
to show up, to stamp that down is the right course of action.
But as of this year, this is the norm. This is accepted. This is what is asked for.
Right.
And instead of educating people and saying, hey, this is probably not a good idea, and here's why, it's, yeah, sure, we're going to do that. I think that's a great idea, because the only way we're going to get past white people keeping you down is by giving you your own graduation. And we're going to give the white people their own too.
Right. Oh, but you can attend the white ones if you want.
So,
but
oh yeah, who's going to be the black kid that actually attends the white one and gets called out for,
right, it's absurd.
getting called an Uncle Tom or, any number of other things. And I want to preface this progression to where we've gotten to now is based on my observations of what has happened in the last 10 years. And anybody who knows me pretty well knows I watch this stuff very carefully. I stay unplugged in to this more so than I let on often, just because it gets super uncomfortable to talk about this stuff in dinner parties and things. But there was a very specific progression I saw here that led to where we are now, where it is okay to have different graduation ceremonies. And it started off, interestingly enough, with the safe spaces, which we all made jokes about.
Oh, yeah.
And these safe spaces propped up because people's feelings, perceptions, were more important than facts. You felt offended by this, so we needed to recognize that you were offended, regardless of the fact that you were offended over something that made no fucking sense and wasn't real. Right. But because your feelings were hurt, we had to recognize that. So out of that bred safe spaces, where you could go and people couldn't tell you the facts. You could talk about your feelings, you could feel better about yourself, regardless of what the world was doing around you.
But you couldn't be contradicted. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't be contradicted. And because of this, what ended up spawning out of this was black-only safe spaces, because white kids don't understand, their trials and tribulations aren't really what the black communities are. So the black community needed a place to go, and I'm going to sound super insensitive about this, but bitch about what all the horrible shit white people did. And, white power and white privilege and all of this shit, and not be contradicted with facts. They could just talk about what they believed in, and it was seen harmless enough. What's a bunch of kids? Basically, it's a bunch of kids crying in a corner about their feelings, right? What's the worst that's going to come out of that? Well, I'll tell you what it is. The next thing you have that comes out of that is that we want safe spaces in the world, not just at the universities. We don't just want to be protected at the university level. We want to be protected for the rest of our life. So I feel like we should have black graduations. And that was the next thing that came out of this. And this whole process was it depended on the school. Some schools were right away. Some schools made this leap in one semester.
Yep.
Other schools took 3 or 4 years.
A couple of years, yep.
But the progression is almost the same across the board, that you watched it happen in news articles and stuff like this. And yes, some schools made the leap immediately, and I chalk that up to them just trying to fit in with the group.
Right, scoreboarding, like we talked about a long time ago.
Or they get new administration that was part of an old school, and they immediately introduced policies that they had at the school they came from, things like that. And now we're at a situation where every group that considers itself oppressed in some form or fashion wants its own ceremony, its own graduation ceremony.
Native, Asian, Latinx, and I'm not quite sure what that is, Black, and then FLI, which is the first generation or low income community. So it's not good enough that, like, hey, you're the first generation and you thump your chest and you're proud to be part of the Yale graduating class. You got to have your own graduation class because you were the first person to make it there. I mean, that just blows my mind.
And the next thing that's coming up, and you can laugh at it, it's already been proposed, is black-only classes. And we're only talking at the university level, but it's not going to stop here, because all of these kids that go through college and go through these systems, get out of college, they're going to start pushing for their systems everywhere else. And if one thing woke culture has absolutely permeated, it's the corporate world. HR departments, everything like this is being absolutely overrun by this woke nature ofness. And if you don't abide by it, you end up getting fired. And this leads into even more problems with segregation. And at this point, we're honestly back where we were 50, 60 years ago. 60 years ago now.
Right. We've gone full circle back to, no joke, according to, the National Association of Scholars, the NAS, there are actual separate but equal, what they termed neo-segregation in American higher education.
Separate, think about that.
Absolutely.
Separate but we equal.
Yeah.
Separate but equal.
Right.
That was one of the dirtiest phrases that was taught about the
Brown versus the Board of Education.
Civil right movement.
Right. And you go back and you look at this and you realize that President Eisenhower had to send the 101st into Arkansas back then to enforce this, because the locals were like, nope. And not only the local leaders, but the local population, everybody from the top down was like, we're not listening. Screw Brown versus, screw the Supreme Court. They had to force them to say, this is going to happen.
With guns.
With guns, yeah. And then they ended up pulling the National Guard. It was this whole big deal. So when you do this, can you imagine Ruby Bridges, the first African-American child to attend an all-white school, she must be spinning like a rotisserie chicken right now. You go down through it. Vivian Malone or James Hood. Those are the first students that, the whole segregated, George Wallace stood in the way of segregation and all this kind of stuff. Those were the two black students that walked past them under armed guard. Right.
Probably the most popular culture reference people know about it now is Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump, right. That's the exact same thing. That was a reference to that. And those two students are the ones, and I know one of them's not with us. I think the gal died in 2005 or 2006. But so she must be spinning like she went through all that to end that practice, and then we're like, well, let's bring it back. It's just absurd.
And welcome it with open arms.
And embrace it. Yeah, as if it's a good thing. It just...
What was, and you talk about how absurd things are, but when you boil them down or you listen to somebody with a completely different perspective from you and how it can be so enlightening. What was that thing you were saying about Howard Stern?
Oh, yeah. A long time ago when I first got Sirius satellite radio in my truck, we were listening to Howard Stern. This is when he first made the leap to satellite radio. He had a caller come in, and he was the Grand Wizard of the KKK. And he said, hey, I vote every year for the Democrats. He said he voted for the Democrats because of what they did to the African-American community. Yeah. He said black. He probably said some things I'm not going to repeat. But the fact is that this Grand Wizard, who self-proclaimed, Klansman, always voted Democrat because of what they did to...
Because of how they kept the black people down. In his perception, how they kept the black people down.
And that's what that was. That's the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. That was all Democrat.
Yeah, Robert Byrd, is it Robert Byrd or Richard Byrd? Robert Byrd, right? Was a senator that Biden gave a eulogy for, and that guy wasn't just kind of a Klansman.
He was the titular head. He was the wizard.
He was a fundraiser for the Klan.
Yeah. Anyway,
and some of the other it's a different issue, but they're linked. They're linked but separate. Let's put it that way. Not separate but equal, which is apparently good now, which it's not. I'm being completely sarcastic. But you have this separate but linked issue it's being fought for quite a while because of how it's actually hurting other minorities, specifically Asian communities, is college, not segregation, but college affirmative action, if you will. And it is segregation. It's not segregation, it's that they're separate. It basically what happens is colleges they started off, and this was in the 90s, I believe. There might have been some in the 80s, but there was some, mostly in the 90s, that colleges wanted to get more African Americans into the university system, specifically the Ivy Leagues, because it was seen as unfair. It was all rich white kids, for the most part, that made it into the Ivy Leagues. So they wanted to make an effort to get more African Americans in there. And I think that is in some ways, that is a just cause. I think the way they went about it was incorrect. Because very quickly what they realized was that because these kids grew up in shitty school districts, they weren't prepared for college.
Right, and overwhelmingly they flunked out.
And just didn't perform and didn't get the benefit of what it was.
Right.
So instead of fixing that problem, what they did, and we're seeing this, we're seeing the same thing in the military now. And maybe that's definitely another podcast we can talk about, but they're lowering the standards so that kids don't fail. Not so that they do better. It's the kid's in the same position as he was before, but now he gets that rubber stamp. And I'm not trying to say this to diminish people, because it's the exact opposite of what I want.
No.
I would love
To raise
for
everybody.
inner city kids to get the same opportunities as non-inner city kids have. And I'm not trying to stray away from saying black and white kids. It is a fact that most of the inner cities are full of black kids. There are white kids there, and they are equally as disadvantaged as the black kids. Right. But because there's such a minority in that population, it doesn't stand out. It's the same thing as most of the fucking white kids in the backwoods of fucking Virginia, where the coal mines closed down, are actually far worse off than most, well, no, and life standards and everything.
Oh, yeah, from the top down, yeah.
Than most kids in inner cities are. But it's a different metric. I don't think, it's not apples and apples when you compare those. It's apples and oranges. Yeah. But because of this, universities started setting quotas, essentially. And it's kind of this unwritten rule. And we know they do it. There's no numbers. They don't publish their quotas.
We've looked.
But
cannot find it.
There's lawsuits over it for affirmative action. One of the ones the Trump administration filed about 5 months ago now. It was 4 or 5 months ago. And it was, it was towards the end of his presidency, and it was against Stanford it had nothing to do with white people. It was Asians. Asians, right. Because Asians were being disproportionately harmed by Stanford's policies of, they had a minimum requirement of black students that would show up. And what they did, even worse than I'm going to give you an example here in a sec, but this is even worse, because they very specifically took from specific groups, because they were overachievers, and took that population and gave it to kids that didn't deserve to get in or shouldn't have got in. And that's a harsh way of putting it, but I at this point I really don't give a shit. So,
but that's exactly what happened.
When you go look at Stanford's numbers, 7% of their students are African Americans. Listed, that's how they list them, as African Americans, blacks. So if Stanford is having trouble reaching a specific number that they want to reach, right? We can work backwards into it. If their number was 5%, they wouldn't have 7, because they would stop at 5.
Well, 13% of the United States is African American.
Correct. But the point being is if they set a quota, when you set quotas because you can't reach something, right? You don't set quotas because you beat it. So if you set a quota, generally you stop once you reach that quota. So I think it's pretty safe to say that Stanford's quota is 7%, or somewhere very close to that.
Right.
Maybe it's probably a little bit less. Maybe it's 6.8.
Right. Well, how you
doesn't matter.
0.8 of a student.
We're going to go with 7% here.
Right. You roll it and round it up to the next human person.
So what happens is Stanford has, let's say, we're just going to use simple numbers, 100 students. Stanford has 100 students that they can accept every year. And their quota is 7 black kids. So what they have to do is they have to go look at all their applications. And let's say 2 of those African American kids, black kids, meet the actual requirements that Stanford has for everybody else. Right. So those 2 kids get in. Now they've got 5 more they need to fill. But they don't have 5 African American black kids that met that quota. They're all below it. So what do? They go grab the 5 highest they can get, regardless of what their test scores are and their aptitudes and all the stuff that Stanford has for its requirements to get into school. So they grab those 5 kids. Well, guess what? Now there's only 93 slots left for everybody else. And 5 of those slots went to people who didn't qualify. But the other 93 do. So what happens is you pick the top 93 kids. So now your quota, and I'm not sorry, now your minimum standards don't even apply anymore. The only place the minimum standards applied is when you were picking the African Americans. But now you're going to pick the 93 top kids. So you're going to have kids that actually scored better, worked harder, are better community members that aren't going to get into Stanford because Stanford was worried about giving 5 slots to kids based on race.
Right.
That is racism.
But when you look at what the Trump administration did against Stanford, they levied a lawsuit against them. You could go back to what the National Review brought up earlier on. We had talked about this, that they had this minorities only remediation program, but unlike every other group that we listed earlier, the only ones that stood out were the Asians, although they wanted the Asians to come in here and be like, hey, you're a minoritized student population, however they phrased it. The Asians didn't fit the profile of the rest of the minorities because their culture is one of, family unit,
work your ass off
and collectively move up as one. And and then, you know, holding education to a high standard, you know, and it's like, well, you're
being
generalizing
very
all
important.
Asians are good at math.
Being
well,
very
a lot of them are very good at math because they were programmed that way when they were a kid. So they didn't fit that profile, and as such, they were discriminated against, just like the white kids, even though they outperformed the white kids. And so they were like, well, Asians and whites are out the door.
And
you know, why?
What you've specifically had happen is because Asians were being overrepresented in the populations of these schools, the schools actually specifically started cutting slots. If you were an Asian kid, instead of saying we have a quota of a minimum of 7 black kids for every 100,
maximum.
They had a maximum. We're only going to take 2 Asian kids for every 100. So you might have kids that scored in the 99th percentile, but they were getting passed over
because of what they look like.
Because they were Asian.
Right. Because of what their skin tone was or what their facial features look like. It's bullshit.
And so this is where affirmative action, and that lawsuit doesn't exist anymore. The DOJ dropped the lawsuit under the guidance of the Biden administration about 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, because that means leftism is corrupt.
And what that has done now has reaffirmed that affirmative action is legal in the United States. And there's problems all over the country. It's not even at the college level. It's also at the high school level. You have de Blasio trying to shut down private high schools in New York because they will not cede to the mandated you've got to have 10 blacks for every 100 white kids mantra.
Because they're private.
And
they don't need to.
Because of that, instead of de Blasio, it's because they won't kneel, de Blasio has made an effort to actually fully shut down the private schools. So it's this idea of, oh, well, you won't listen to what we do? Well, I'll tell you what, we're going to hurt everybody. These private schools that overwhelmingly have insane graduation rates. Over 90% of the kids end up in college that go to these schools. Huge success rates. And they have enormous outreach into poor families and poor... They actually have a proportion where they actually have outreach into poor neighborhoods and poor underdeveloped kids. As long as they meet the standards they need, these kids will make it in regardless of cost. The problem is, a lot of the times it's Asian kids.
And it's not done by the state. It's done by people, private citizens with big pockets. They go out and go, hey, I want to be a philanthropist. I want to help out. You know, the other portion of this we could segue into it is the political issues. You know,
well,
it's pushing an agenda, a specific agenda,
and it's this agenda, and it's a hidden agenda. It's not an intended agenda. It's this agenda of racism of low expectations, right? So you might feel like you're being virtuous because you're being helpful to the black community because you're making it easier for them. It's like the idea of voter registration. Black people are literally what Democrats say is blacks are too stupid they can't get an ID.
They can't find their way to the DMV
to get an ID. Right. That is literally what Democrats are saying is that black people are too stupid to get an ID, which is completely, they're not, because they partake in society. They have rents. They collect checks. They pay taxes. They fly on airplanes. Right. All of these require IDs.
Right before he got elected or right after?
Whether they like it or not, they buy guns.
He was again. You have to have an ID to buy a gun. You have to have an ID to get into a library. You know what I mean? So how is it voter suppression to ask for an ID before you cast a ballot? You know, and
so this is this racism of low expectations, right? And this applies to the universities because instead of setting a bar for people to reach and exceed and excel and compete and have a meritocracy, what you have is lowering the bar to meet a number that doesn't fucking matter. It's meaningless. It's chosen by some random dumbass bureaucrat. It's agreed to everybody by in a room, and then it gets pushed forward like it's some magic number that's going to fix everything.
Right. Hell, Biden doesn't even think that people of color, all of them, can operate Google. Year of our Lord 2021, you know, like...
What was it that he said? You know,
not everybody
poor kids are just as smart as white kids.
Right. You know, and then you've got, you know, Trump, who's the racist, giving the historically black colleges and universities the biggest paycheck they've ever had.
Criminal justice reform that actually mattered.
Right. But anyway, that's a total different podcast, which we've touched on that on other ones. But yeah, the political issues, politicians are using this to push an agenda.
100%.
You know?
Politicians, media.
Yep, all of them. You know, you've got on the left, they're thinking that blacks and minorities are getting shot up more by the police disproportionately than whites, which is not the case. And then on the right, you've got a bunch of people going, well, if some damn terrorists are going to come over here and they're damn...
Yeah, it's no different than
their Toyotas and shoot us up, you know?
So if you ask people in general, especially right after an incident happens, George Floyd or any of the cop killings, or shootings, the guy that what's his face in Kenosha that was reaching for a knife while cops were trying to arrest him and they shot him. Seems like a pretty logical step of...
If you have a gun and they have a knife, shoot them.
Yeah, he's going to grab a knife. Wait, do you have to wait till he sticks you with the knife? Does he have to lunge at you? I mean, where's the line where you're actually allowed to...
But
anyway,
it's not to say that cops don't make mistakes. They do.
Point being is every time one of these events happens...
They're good guys. Yeah.
If you ask people, how often do you think... How many African Americans a year do you think are killed by cops? Right? Because that's the big story. Black people are killed by cops. It's a pandemic, right? Regularly, the answer, and the polls are all, again, it depends on when you ask, right? But very specifically, if you ask after one of these events, people say more than 1,000 blacks are killed a year by cops. When in reality, the real number is 226. That was 2020. 226, and the number doesn't vary much from year to year. In
2020,
4 years.
when we had more riots and you could shake a stick at,
when everything was happening and everything,
cops were being defunded.
And if you want to even go back to
cars.
2019, because that's when some of the big cases were, it was 235. Now, this doesn't mean that 235 black men were killed unjustifiably. What it means is there was 235 black guys that died to cops. Now, that is 1/5 of the average. The answer you get from the American public when you poll them after these events. It's over 1,000. Sometimes it's 1,200. Sometimes it's 1,300.
Murdering people every day.
There's 3 or 4 people a day that die. Black people die to cops. Now, when you look, and one of the things that the media loves to do is they love to give this perception that black people die more frequently to cops than white people, which on the face value is true. Right? Because there's 13-14% African American population in the United States, right? And whites are 47%, 48%. It's not 50 anymore. It's less than 50.
48, 49%, something like that.
So you would think, okay, well, that means that whites should have 3 to 4 times as many deaths, right? If the population controls. And that's a very obscure way of looking at it. And in reality, so the two numbers are for 2020, 432 whites were killed by cops. 226 blacks were killed by cops. Wow, that number's really askew. There's not even twice as many white people that were killed by cops. Well, there's a little nuance here that a lot of people won't talk about because it doesn't fit their agenda. The big problem here is blacks overwhelmingly have more interactions with cops than whites.
And it's a cultural thing. It's a matter of...
We'll get to that. The point being is if you look at the number of interactions by race, by cops, it is over 7 times as many interactions. Black people have 7 times as many interactions with cops as white people do. Oh, well, shit, there's proof of racism right there. Cops interact with black people more than cops. The cops are obviously targeting black people. No. That's not it at all. Because if you look at crime statistics, black people commit on average, guess what? 7 times more crimes than white people. Right. And it's not because they're black. It's because of inner cities. It's a societal and cultural problem. Right. Inner cities are the problem, not race.
Right.
Inner cities are poorly run, poorly managed, all by Democrats, mostly by Democrats, mind you. And what you end up with is these poverty-stricken groups of people that have no other choice but crime. And that's what they fall back to. And that's all that there is for protection.
And that's what's encouraged. Yeah.
And it's lionized in the black culture. You can say it's not. You can call me a racist for saying that.
Really?
But it's literally lionized in the culture of the African Americans.
All you got to do is download an album. Pick one.
Yeah.
And you tell me Eminem doesn't glorify that, or
so that's a societal problem. And we're getting out of the sphere of what we want to do this podcast. But what I'm trying to get at here is the way these stats can be twisted to make it look like there's this pandemic against black people. I'm not trying to argue and say that the African American community doesn't have problems. And I would 100% see the argument that the root core of these problems is based in racism. But it's based in racism from 60 years ago, and these are endemic problems that have not been addressed correctly and have actually been made worse by government.
It's not the standards at Yale that are the problem.
The standards at Yale's aren't going to fix it.
Or Stanford or any of the other colleges there. That, safe space is not going to fix that.
You want to give white people a fucking hard time for fucking bullshit? Give them a hard time for making themselves feel better that because they gave a quota that black people get into college, all of a sudden they're absolved of all the issues in the black community.
Right.
And that's the problem we face right now, is these bullshit answers and these bullshit excuses for racism do nothing but make
it worse, to perpetuate it.
They make it worse. But at the end of the day, all they're doing is making people that are culpable in the problems feel better that they actually did something when they did nothing. And in most times they made it worse.
They've amplified it, right. You had mentioned earlier, you're like, you could look at, the housing crisis, was attributed to Democrats.
One of the big problems in the housing crisis. It wasn't the only thing by any means, but one of the problems with the housing crisis was giving loans to people that couldn't pay them back.
And that was white people too. It didn't matter what color you were.
But one of the aspects of giving people loans was that banks had to give so many loans based on race, regardless.
Right, and if they didn't get subsidized by the government afterwards. The government would come by and turn the faucet off.
Oh, good old Janet Reno. This goes back to Clinton.
Yeah.
This isn't. I'm not even talking Obama. This is 90s.
But even the banks were like, well, this doesn't work. And then when it failed, like the bank said it would, the people have been lending money to people for years and years and years.
Yeah,
so this
good
ain't
old
gonna
Barney
work.
Frank with his man boobs show up.
The liberal lion. But they come back and they go, oh, it was the bank's predatory lending. It wasn't the government. It wasn't us. It wasn't our policies. It was those banks that were predatory lending. They invented... How do you force someone to take money?
The idea of predatory lending blows...
Yeah.
If you're a bank that gives loans to people that can't pay it back, and that's your target, that's not a good business plan.
You're the dumbest banker in the history of bankers. The only reason they did that is because the government said, hey, we'd pay you.
The government threatened them.
Yeah, and
Janet Reno threatened them.
Yeah, if you don't, we're going to stop you. Yeah, we're going to
shut you down.
Yeah. So, I mean... we got a little off topic there.
Sorry, I got a little amped up.
Well, that is our MO. We do the whole.
You said do.
We're not drinking whiskey now. We're cool. But yeah, that whole concept also leads to these people making everything about their race. So no matter what happens, it's because of what they look like. Nothing can be about on them, like self-empowerment. Nothing can be about their self-betterment or their fault, like just leaning in. I told a gal today, I said, so the difference between you and I is that I don't blame other people for my shortcomings. I own mine. I mess up every day, but I don't blame it on other people, and I sure as shit don't blame it on what I look like. We've all had instances that you didn't look right, or you weren't wearing the right thing to get in, or whatever. Now it's about a mask. You don't wear a mask, you can't get in. But like the college gal, she was in a dorm that was locked. You can fill this in. She was eating lunch.
College. So, and this kind of gets into this idea that
you can scoreboard.
Well, not just scoreboard, but I'm going to give this girl a huge benefit of the doubt here, more than I probably really want to. But at the end of the day, what happens is when you tell people that the only reason they have problems is because somebody else is oppressing you, right?
Right.
They're going to start seeing oppression everywhere, even where it doesn't exist. So at Smith College, this is a huge case. And believe it or not, the New York Times actually did a fantastic investigative report on this. Fantastic in the sense that it wasn't overly left. It's still left-leaning, but they provide a lot of facts. There's a lot of research done here. And I'm wondering if it's because the New York Times is starting to realize the cultural rot with some of this stuff. They kind of want to put a backstop. I think it's too late for that. But... nonetheless, you have this young lady at Smith College. Her name, and I feel really bad because I'm not going to be able to pronounce it, unfortunately, simply because I'm not good with names, period. But Miss Canute, I believe it's Omu Canute, in 2008, in Northampton, Massachusetts, Smith College. She went to have lunch, and I'm guessing she wanted to have lunch in a quiet place so she could think to herself and contemplate her summer classes and whatever. The problem was the place she chose was a common area, a lounge in a dormitory that was closed for the summer. There was nobody there, which
Probably
meets those requirements for a
nice
quiet
place.
space.
It's
right?
probably appealing to her, right?
And that's fine and dandy. I'm not even being super. I could be insanely critical.
I could see me doing that, going to find a nice quiet spot.
Yeah, but you're not going to go somewhere that's closed.
Well, I mean, if it wasn't locked. Or
Anyways,
whatever, but yeah.
A janitor sees her, right? Janitor doesn't approach her. He doesn't do anything. This janitor had been informed by the campus police that these areas that are closed, if you see somebody, people that aren't authorized to be there, let us know. We've had cases of vandalism. We've had some issues. We'll deal with it. Right. So that's what this janitor does. Now, mind you, this janitor is legally blind.
So he really can't even see but a shadow.
Miss Canute, and again, I apologize if I'm saying her name incorrectly. You can make fun of my name all you want, and I won't be offended to get us even. Miss Canute was in a dark area of the lounge, and he could not identify her. He just said, there's a person here. I don't know who it is. They don't belong here. Can you guys come check it out? So a campus police officer, which is unarmed by campus protocols. On Smith College, the campus police are not armed. It's the way it is. It's the way they are. It's not, and this isn't like a secret. This is the rule. Everybody knows this. He shows up, and by his description, he has a very pleasant conversation with Miss Canute and explained to her, hey, you can finish your lunch here. You're not supposed to be here, but you know what? Hey, finish your lunch. He recognized her. He knew she was a student, right? So he recognized her. So obviously they'd seen each other before. And he said, you're fine. Finish your lunch. But, hey, maybe next time don't go into a closed place. And that was the end of the conversation.
Right. I wouldn't even qualify that as a slap on the wrist. There's just, hey.
It was just, hey, letting you know. And that's fine. I think that's a perfectly acceptable response to that. Hey, finish your lunch. Just, don't come back here again.
I've been illegally parked and had cops do that to me. Hey, get out of here. After
now,
you're done. Yeah.
2 days later, Miss Canute writes an article, and I'm not going to quote it because it's long, it's a diatribe, and it really, really, really casts doubt in my mind, on her intentions of this whole interaction. But 2 days later, she writes a letter on Facebook, a 2-page letter, and states how she was harassed for eating while black. That's her words, quote, eating while black. And she felt in danger of her life because the cop could have been armed and might have shot her.
Could have been armed and might have shot her. So that's a double predication that I don't even know what that qualifies. 10%?
So here's the situation we're at, right? And given Miss Canute the benefit of the doubt, because she is fed so much bullshit, she believes that any interaction she has with somebody who is not black is because she's black.
Or with the police in general.
She had an interaction with a white cop who got called because a white janitor saw her. Obviously, the only reason they did that was because she was black. It had nothing to do with the fact that she was eating in an unauthorized area, that the guy didn't know who she was, or the fact that she wasn't told to leave and she wasn't threatened and just said, hey, go eat somewhere that's not
next
closed.
time, don't do this. Yeah.
None of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was she was profiled for eating while black. And within 1 day of that being released, the college president put the janitor on leave, paid leave, along with the cop, so the investigation could be done. The ACLU, being that fucking outstanding organization they are, jumped immediately on top of this to defend Miss Canute for her, eating while black case. And the school hired an outside attorney, a third party attorney, to investigate a third party legal firm to investigate the institution. The institution determined a lot of these facts that I've already laid out for you. Not only was the call not made, when the call was made that there was somebody where they weren't supposed to be, was race never mentioned, but the cops' interaction was insanely polite, overly so, and that the students' reaction was unwarranted.
So now these two
men,
but it doesn't matter. These two men
because
are dinged.
These two men now are considered racists. They've received multiple death threats. Along with the lunch lady. The lunch lady I forgot about this, but the lunch lady got dragged into this too somehow. She lost her job too.
For giving the sandwich to her?
And Canute later called her out.
Wow.
And the really sad thing about this is, and this is a thing that really makes me doubt the veracity and the intentions of this whole interaction, is that even after all of these facts came out, the young woman has stood by her guns and still claimed that this is a racist interaction, and the only reason it happened was because she was black, despite all the facts and everything else also that was come out there.
The guy can't see her. The guy's legally blind. That's why he probably, with all due respect to him, I'm sure he's a great guy, but that's probably one of the few jobs he can do and do it well. He doesn't have to drive anywhere or anything.
And
It's fucking stupid.
You can see this case play out all over now, where because race is such an important issue, and it's the driver of every conversation we have now, that it becomes a primary predicate for an interaction when it's not.
Right.
And this is going to lead to the same place where the over amplification of feminism has spilled into the workplace. And what you have now is, in any corporate environment, and you can ask anybody who says this isn't the case is full of shit, but in any corporate environment where men and women work together, which is most of them, there's a few that don't, but for the most part, where you have men and women that work together,
yeah,
men
name one that
walk on eggshells around women everywhere they go. They will refuse, and in any case where they do not absolutely have to, they will avoid women because of the threat to their career that even an unintentional mix-up can go to. You are going to have the same relation, the same outcome
same thing with
race.
With race, yeah.
You are going to have
that is a nuclear
white
weapon.
people, black people, Mexicans, I say Mexicans, Hispanics, doesn't matter, Asians. All of these people are going to refuse to interact with each other because they're going to be afraid of calling a racist because they said the wrong word. No ill intent required. Mind you, in order to have a crime, you have to have intent.
Right. Not anymore.
And so with that being the case now, this is where the world is headed, to where you are going to segregate people even further. And this is what we're talking about, the new segregation. Because people are going to choose to avoid each other based on race, because now being segregated means you're going to lose your job. Your kids are never going to be able to go to school again because they got your same last name as you. I've been told that. I've been told by people that because I was going to start this podcast, my kids might not ever be able to get into school because of the things I might say. And it's legit. That is legit. That is a possibility.
Yeah.
But you know what? I straight up don't give a fuck.
No. Congress shall make no law. Yeah. The First Amendment, right? But no, you touched on this, and I kind of want to jump in here. Victor Senby, if I'm mispronouncing his last name, is a black fella who put ropes in a tree in Oakland. And then the Oakland mayor...
Whoa.
But this
now, mind
builds on what you're saying.
Mr. Senby is built like a brick shithouse.
I want him to train me.
And he educates people.
Yeah. So this was
physical fitness.
So he puts like 4 or 5 ropes on this tree, and it's outside.
In a public
birds
park.
Are chirping, and everyone's outside getting fresh air.
COVID-19.
Blah, blah, blah. I call her scoreboarding mayor Sachef. I'm not pronouncing her name. The Oakland mayor. She said, you have to start with the assumption that these are hate crimes. Okay, she's standing next to a rope with a plastic handle on it.
People reported that there were nooses hanging in trees, and
she scoreboarded on it,
and it was this huge fucking deal. And the cops showed up, and they were cutting them down. And this black guy shows up and goes, "Yo, what are you doing? These are my workout."
Why are you cutting down my shit? And showed a video of it, like, "Hey, this is not a racist thing here. We're helping people get in shape." Anyway, she goes, "You start with the assumption that these are hate crimes, not." What are these? Are these intentionally, are these nooses? No, they are not with a rope.
Never mind,
there's
a fucking plastic handle on them.
Handle on them, right. Yeah, I guess the Klan is making things comfortable for their lynchings now. I mean, like, I don't know. But, however, the mayor and Nicholas Williams, he's the director of city parks, also said it didn't matter whether the ropes were meant to send a racist message. It
didn't matter.
Didn't matter whether the ropes were meant to send a racist message. They had to come down. So, yes, it does matter. Intent does matter.
Feelings are more important than intent.
Feelings are more, right. And, I mean, it's no different than the Bubba Wallace deal. I mean, I saw a picture of that. And
Bubba Wallace, NASCAR. If you guys know, Bubba Wallace he's like the only African-American ever to drive a car, apparently. I'm being sarcastic. Yeah. But he's a black NASCAR driver, and he's actually pretty good. Yeah. He's done really well.
But somebody tied a noose, and it looked like a noose. This one looked like a noose, as a handle to pull
it wasn't a noose. Somebody tied a knot in a door. It was meant to pull the fucking garage door closed on the garage. It had been there for many years.
Yeah, so it's like at least a year before he got in there, and then they sent the FBI down there to look at it, because that's obviously NASCAR's just a bunch of rednecks who hate black people.
And you had all this solidarity for the black guy, all because somebody tied a fucking knot in a garage door.
And what could those 5?
Has there been an apology from anybody? Has Bubba come out and said, "I'm sorry for calling everybody racist. I didn't think that this..."
No. He said he was glad it wasn't meant for him, but he didn't condemn the overreaction in the investigation.
It's something along the lines, the overreaction was necessary in the current times we live in.
It was ridiculous. So the media looks for shock value and sensationalizes everything. That's on the right and left. But, all right, and so what this leads to is a situation where if you're on one side of the aisle and you can say something so minor that isn't necessarily racist.
Well,
but
not necessarily. It could be no intent for racism.
Right. But you could still be called and branded a racist.
You can tie ropes on a tree and you're not racist, but you get called a racist.
You could be a black man who ties ropes on a tree for exercise purposes and be called a racist. And start with the premise that those is a racist action. But if you're on the other side of the aisle and you're for the right cause,
if you're supporting the agenda,
pushing that, you can do something completely overtly racist and be overlooked.
And not ignored. Even overtly racist isn't even the right, like, that doesn't even emphasize
evil.
How bad, like, we're trying to set this, what we're going to talk about up here, being overtly racist doesn't
begin to
draw the correct box around what just happened here.
Right. So, a couple days ago, as most of you guys know, there was a shooting spree at at some massage parlors, and the person who did it was a Caucasian, and some of the victims were Asian.
6 of the 8.
Okay, six of the 8 were Asian. Okay, so Candace Owens types out, says the number one violent offenders. This is on Twitter, by the way.
Candace Owens, if you don't know, is a very prominent conservative black female,
a black activist. She did the whole walk away movement, trying to get people off the off the Democratic plantation, etc.
She takes a metaphorical baseball bat to the left every day.
Yeah, that would be somebody else I wouldn't want to be married to either, because you'd never win an argument.
You win arguments?
I do. Every now and again. Jennifer, if you're listening.
I don't win arguments.
Her and Callie McEnany, however you say her name.
Right or wrong?
Yeah. Those are two women. No. I don't want to be married to. I'd never win. So, anyway, I digress.
I don't want to be married to him because I'm happily married to the wife I'm currently married to.
Amen.
Right, John?
Me too. Of course. That's exactly what I said. Just delete that other part. Okay. So, no, in all sincerity, she wrote, after this shooting, the number one violent offenders against black people are other black people. The number one violent offenders against Asian Americans are also black people.
No. In this stat, and I want to call this out, this is a very, very specific thing. And what it did is it measured whites, blacks, Hispanics,
and Asians.
Yeah. And across all four, if you look at all 4 races, whites, Hispanics, and blacks, the standout number was that the highest number of murders happened not interracially, but within the race. Whites killed whites, blacks killed blacks, Hispanics killed Hispanics.
Far more.
Like 70 to 20%.
Yeah, it's almost like they live next to each other.
Asians are this really weird dynamic where it was like 24, 24, 30, 20. Like,
it's not all that weird when you think about it, because
they were very level. What I'm saying is that the different races were very disproportionate compared to Asians were pretty even, but the number one biggest one was African American.
So she wrote that, and she goes, look, both hashtag Black Lives Matter and hashtag, Asian Lives Matter are campaigns dedicated to stomping out white supremacy because clown world. Those are her words, all right?
Clown world.
So she posted this. She posts this, right? And then Liam O'Mara sent Candace Owens a picture.
Who, mind you, is this fat, bearded, four-eyed
beta male. Beta
male. His next most popular picture is a fucking cat.
A cat staring at a damn fireplace. What? But Liam O'Mara sent Candace Owens a picture of a Klan hood. And if you go back, we'll pop it up here on the screen.
No. He didn't send a picture of a Klan. It wasn't an actual Klan hood. But what he did,
he took
whether he made this or not doesn't matter. He has a picture of a fucking tablecloth with 2 holes cut in it, shaped like a Klansman hood.
Yeah, and he types it back, sends her that picture, and goes, you may have dropped this, quote unquote. Though that was his tweet to her.
A white guy sends this to a black chick.
In 2021.
That's racist, misogynist, whatever you want to put to it.
So Liam O'Mara, he sends this out, right? And nothing. Crickets. He just happens to be he's running for Congress in like the 42nd or 45th, I have to look it up, congressional district in California. So like this is like one of the most hippest, green, progressive woke states, and he's sending a black woman a picture of this, and he's
They're so anti-racist that even non-racist shit gets fucking cut down.
So, I mean, having lived there, they're kind of particular about their language, So she reports this, rightfully so, to Twitter. And Twitter has a pretty strict policy about strict, imagery.
Super strict.
Yeah, about imagery that is hateful or intent. And it includes, items that are historically, you can go look this up, historically considered racist, like a swastika. And it doesn't spell out.
Maybe a burning cross.
But yeah, like those things would be considered historically.
Pretty sure the fucking KK hood is pretty historic.
Right. So they write back, yeah, that doesn't violate our rules. They spell it out in different terms. We'll post it here. But yeah, they're basically saying, no, there's no problem there. Could you imagine if that went the other way around? Could you imagine if she was white and she sent him a Klan's hood and he was black? What the condemnation would be?
I will grant that Candace Owens is firebrand, and that's fine. That doesn't justify somebody sending this.
I have not heard
to the point to where she filed a police report.
Yeah, and rightfully, I'm glad that these laws exist, because one of her comments was, hey, this might not be a crime on Twitter, but in the real world it is, and I'm handing this off to my sheriff, who's going to hand it off to the sheriff of your county, and you're going to be brought up on charges. So, and that's where the article stopped that I read. So we'll see where this progresses, because it's pretty new. But here you are, you've created a society, you've created with these rules, you've emboldened people to attack the other side in a macabre,
to the point where
evil way.
Non-racist shit is now racist, but racist shit isn't racist, depending entirely on your what agenda.
Right.
You are pushing.
So segregation is okay, and sending a black woman a Klan's hood is okay. But if you were to hey, I think everybody should ascribe to the same standard of education. You're racist.
This piece of shit is playing the political agenda of owning up to it and admitting to it, providing a fucking backhanded apology, which isn't real, and then running away from this and hiding in a fucking corner for a year or two so he can run for politics again.
And again, this is in I think probably one of the biggest points of our contention when we were putting this whole podcast together was this point right here. It was a backhanded apology. This man apologized. He said, "I'm truly sorry." All right.
His exact words were, "I am truly sorry." That is 4 words.
Right.
That were qualified by 9 fucking paragraphs.
By this, where he says, and this is the creme de la creme, this defines the whole point right here. What I did was a display of white privilege. I will never know what pain can be experienced by members of our community when faced with images of the Klan like the one I used. And he goes on...
Because it's not well known that the fucking images of the Klan are fucking bad, period.
But what he's truly saying there is, I'm not sorry... My skin tone is sorry. My meat suit.
I didn't do it. My skin tone did.
My analytical processing, because I'm white, didn't allow me to understand that sending a Klan hood to a black woman, or anyone for that matter, I'll qualify that statement, is a bad thing. Are you joking?
This guy's running to make policy in the United States government, and he's too fucking stupid to know that sending a fucking Klan hood to somebody, regardless of skin color,
he doesn't even apologize for it. He apologizes for his white privilege. He's like, I'm not sorry. Well, yeah, I'm truly sorry. But then he qualifies it with this white privilege bullshit. I did this because I'm white. No, that's garbage. And then he goes back in about talking about other things. How it's 42nd Congressional District, by the way.
The injustices that plague our home today. What the fuck are you talking? The same injustices that you fucking promoted by sending a cake.
Right. How about freedom of speech? How about freedom of expression? All that.
If there's ever a person that needs to get punched in the throat, it's this fat fuck.
And his cat. Screw his cat. No. His cat's cool. Cat can live. But yeah. Anyway, you progress through this whole situation where you're okay. It's okay to attack somebody of a different race and get away with it, and nobody crickets from the media. And if it wasn't for her tweeting and her platform,
I don't know. I would guess that I'm hoping that you guys come to us for information, and I wish that you guys would know this stuff. But I bet there's a bunch of you that had no idea any of this even happened.
Right.
That a white guy. Could you imagine if Jared Kushner had sent a picture of a fucking napkin that looks like a Ku Klux Klan hood to Condoleezza... let's not say Condoleezza Rice, because she's... Let's say, what's that dumb bitch that's in charge? The one that did the Benghazi crap. Susan Rice.
Yeah, Rice.
Susan Rice. Could you imagine if Jared Kushner had sent a napkin that looks like a fucking Klan hood to Susan Rice?
Right.
They'd be... The Secret Service would be hiding Trump in a fucking bunker right now.
Right. Right. There would be just huge public outcry, but it goes the other way and nobody cares. And this is so egregious.
And it's proof that all it is an agenda.
Right.
If it doesn't fit the agenda, it's not fit to print. And this is just proof of it.
Right. And I mean, that's an extreme. And guys, like I said, we'll post a picture here, but this isn't like, oh, well, it's just like some doodle, like the one kid who like,
he was running for the 42nd Congressional District.
Right. This is huge. And then he rightfully stepped down from that. He's not going to run this year. Like, like
don't give him fucking credit for that.
I'm just saying, like, he gave himself some penance, and nobody else is.
You're the one bitching about him not apologizing. Oh, he gave himself some
I'm saying, rightfully so. He should step down. Is that who you want to elect as a racist? Like, he knew he was unelectable. So he stepped down. But anyway. But I think we can close on that, where we've gone full circle. We've gone from, hey, you need a safe space and some coloring books to, it's okay.
We talk about this anymore, I'm going to fucking burst a fucking vein.
It's okay to send a Klansman to a black woman. Fuck. So, all right, guys, I had fun doing this. I hate this topic. I despise racism.
I fucking hate this shit.
And, but, it is interesting when you put all the parts and pieces together. Like and subscribe if you like, comment. I hope, if you guys know something that we don't or you want to chime in, we want to hear it. But, like and subscribe. And as always, have a good night and Semper Fi.
Have a good night, everybody.